there's a crypto company in California called Coinbase. And the CEO this week put out a blog where he basically said that his goal or his mission statement for the company in the coming future is that they want to be apolitical. They want to cut down on the political discourse at work, and they want to focus on their mission. He had a company walk out in the middle of the summer because he and some of the employees' minds didn't react fast enough, didn't comment fast enough on some of like the social justice issues that were going on in the country. And apparently this is his response now.
He's offered a severance package for anyone who doesn't like the direction the company's going in, like a generous one. So he's like, hey, this is your exit. You can leave and we will pay you to leave.
I get why he's doing it. I mean, no matter what side you're on in the workplace, left or right, there's just going to be someone who just disagrees with you, and it's never going to end. So how do you create unity within your own company? Like, no matter what side you take, like there's no view from nowhere unless you just straight up don't talk about it, don't care.
You can't do that now.
You can't not talk about it.
Well, he had an employee walkout for not making a statement. So now you can't even not talk about it.
But no matter the statement he made, wouldn't certain people disagree with that statement?
Okay, so this is where you get into, and we're going to stay as apolitical as we possibly can on this channel. This is where you get into the madness of, well, how did we get here? This is not overnight. This is 20 years in the making. This is Silicon Valley creating an echo chamber of one voice. And when they talk about political discourse, they don't want discourse. They want allegiance. Like those people in these companies that are activists, they don't want the opposing voice. They don't want to be able to have political discourse and then we can all go back to work. They want everyone that agrees with the way that they think. This isn't dialogue. This is indoctrination. Like you've been recruiting from the same schools into the same area of the country, dropping them into companies, and you've housed them in these massive buildings on campuses and put them around each other 150 hours a week. And now the companies are realizing, holy shit, we created an echo chamber of one political voice that is now out of control and we can't stop it. And this has been coming for 20 years.
What do you do about it? What would you do if you were in this guy's position?
Oh, for me, it's super simple. I would do exactly what he's doing. He's drawing a line in the sand saying, we're the market leader. I'm never going to be blackmailed by anyone in my company again to do what I don't want to do. So this is what we think. This is what I think. This is what the investors think. If you don't like it, fuck off. Take your 2 weeks and get the hell out. Because we're here. I'm taking, think if you're this guy, you're trying to disrupt the entire banking system in the world. And you have programmers walking off the job because some guy resisted arrest and got shot. The other thing for some of these tech companies too is now they've sort of seen the problem at Facebook and Google, and we're probably going to get into that, is they've seen the venom now turned on them. It went from, oh, we're all in this together and we have beliefs that we all believe, to now it's the employees turning on Google and Facebook and saying, well, you're not doing enough, or you're actually a bad actor now. They don't know how to react to that. Because Roman, you and I have had this conversation for years. At the end of the day, they just care about profit. And this is getting in the way of that.
Right.
It's getting in the way of it internally, and it's getting in the way of it externally. Internally, it's a distraction, and it creates a really divisive workplace.
Right. And the companies are not necessarily telling you what to think or do in your personal life. I think the issue is that they're walking off midday. Like if you get off work and you go support whoever you want to support, like I don't think that's what they're talking about.
Yeah, they're talking about you being concerned about things that are outside the scope of the company. The company's there to do whatever its job is. I don't give a, I go to McDonald's. I don't want to know what their position is on George Floyd. And if I work at McDonald's and I'm frying French fries, I shouldn't down tools because Ronald McDonald hasn't given his position on George Floyd. People are turning everything political now. It's fucking insane.
Sure. But the people that are walking out, like if they at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, whatever, went and did a thing, like the company doesn't care. I think the issue is that it's midday. It's on company time.
But it's also too, I would be willing to wager in these companies, it's a very small percentage of the loudest people in the companies, and everyone else just wants to be quiet because they don't want to be ostracized and they don't want to deal with the hate. Like, it's a distraction, and it creates a really divisive workplace internally, right? Externally, you're alienating 50% of your customer base if this stuff gets too far out of control, and you're also walking down a very dangerous regulatory issue, which is, I think, what Facebook and Google and all these other companies are dealing with right now. Like, if you're Facebook or Google, you don't really have to worry necessarily at the moment about alienating customer base because you don't have competitors. But there's other companies around the country where you look at ESPN, for example, they're losing market share every single day to companies like Outkick and Barstool and these smaller companies that don't have this political agenda. Whereas ESPN decided, hey, we're going to have a political agenda. Our employees are all going to be on board. But now, forget internally, you're now throwing down the gauntlet to 50% of your customer base, saying, hey, we don't really want you to partake in our product unless you think like we think. Really?
I saw somebody on Twitter was saying when this guy Brian Armstrong from Coinbase made that announcement, people were saying, well, I'm gonna recommend people don't work here. But I think this decision, whatever decision you make as a company, is just gonna attract and repel whoever it's meant to have. So okay, the people that don't want to work here are not going to work here anyway, regardless of what the guy says.
I think that's why he's done it.
But if he's silent, they're not going to work there anyway. So he may as well take a stand, because even if he doesn't say anything, it's going to repel those people either way. With this like COVID world, everyone work remote. Like, I think the small minority of people are underestimating how easy it's going to be to maintain a remote job. I think everyone's still acting like super choosy. But like, I think people are going to discover real fast that you can't, unless you're like the 1% of performers. Like, I don't know how picky you can be with precisely what kind of corporate speech you want your company to have.
So there's two types of responses. There's the Coinbase response, which is in the moment, hey, we've had enough. We're not doing this anymore. We're drawing a line in the sand. It's saying, this is who we want. This is who we don't want. Brian Armstrong fully understands, hey, he's going to take some stuff right up front. But I think the other companies, it's a longer tail, but the goal is the same. Like, I think the Facebooks, the Googles, they would love to sort of cull the herd a little bit and reduce this activist employee mindset. But they're going to do it in a different way. It's stuff we've talked about in the past. They're going to do it with remote work, which will lead to hiring people in different places, which will lead to not necessarily hiring every grad from Stanford, Harvard, Cal, bringing them from one echo chamber of elite universities into the echo chamber of the tech community, in the echo chamber of Silicon Valley. If you hire the person from the University of Texas and they work out of their condo in Austin, you get a different person. And they're not being indoctrinated. I think that's what Google and Facebook are looking at, but they're looking at it long tail because they don't feel they can take the social heat. Because Google and Facebook both, in the last 3 weeks, they've basically said the same thing, but they've started with their internal chats. So Facebook and Google have both clamped down on political speech on their internal platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's creating such a divisive workplace for them.
It's nice to see some changes, though. Finally, some people are pushing back at this stuff, and
I think this is just the beginning.
It's just the beginning of the turn back, because a lot of people have had enough. And you know, if a company does this, then the company just goes. I like, okay, that company goes up in my estimation, because I think, well, at least they're brave enough to stand up for what they believe in, and what they believe in is being a good company for what I'm paying them for. Like, I got a email from Quip, the toothbrush company, which sponsors every podcast under the sun, telling me about Black Lives Matter and disparities between dental hygiene and all this shit between colored groups. And I'm like, what? Just make a fucking toothbrush. I don't give a shit about this stuff. I just cancelled it immediately. Don't want any of that shit.
Sure, but there's part of that where they're not doing that. They're not doing that for you. They're doing that because they're afraid their employees are going to walk out the door. This is where the internal and the external start to clash. if you're a software company and you're not a customer facing company, really, you're a B2B company. You can have whatever you can do whatever you have to do to just keep your employees happy, because basically you're never front facing the customer, and all the other business client wants is that you do your job better than anyone else. But once you start getting into customer facing businesses, well, now the customer, like Massey, has a say of, wait a minute, why are you sending me this message? I don't agree with this message. So now the customer is risking pissing off the client in order to keep the employees happy. Well, like that's where we talk about you're on the train to the edge of the cliff. Like when you have LeBron James coming out being like, well, I don't care if people who vote for Trump watch the NBA. Adam Silver's got to want to put a gun in his mouth. You're basically telling half the audience, hey, we don't care whether you watch or not. That's why you have the lowest ratings in the history of the NBA for these finals. So this is where a company like the NBA is making choices to keep the employees happy and alienating 50% of the customer base. How long can that last?
It can't.
I guess it depends on how big the 50% that remains is. Most companies would say, I'm not giving up 50% of my profits to keep my employees happy. I'll get new employees. If you were to ask me long tail, I think one of the first things that starts to happen very, very slowly is I think they start to move out of California.
So you think more and more companies are going to take the same stance as Coinbase?
Yes, and some of them will do it with a line in the sand like Coinbase and a blog post of saying I think Coinbase says, listen, we're the market leader. We're in finance. We have a lot of libertarian programmers anyway. We have a lot of libertarian right-leaning customers. This is not going to affect us the same way it'll affect social companies, so to speak. So I think that's why they're drawing a line in the sand. I think you look at a Google, a Facebook, some of these other companies, they're going to do it by almost breeding out the activists. They're going to do it by remote working. Then they're going to do it by hiring from other places. Then they're going to do it by siloing their work outside of the echo chamber of Silicon Valley, because they don't need to be there anymore. Like, why do you need to be? This is the same thing as the banks needed to be on Wall Street anymore. Why do you need to be on Silicon Valley? Do you need to be there? What can't you do in Nashville that you can do in Palo Alto? Can you not hire programmers? Can you not raise money? There's no reason why they have to be there, and they're going to start to realize that the monster had finally come home for them, and they're going to start to move.
I've seen this even at companies I worked for where we have an office in the US, and I remember people in our Canadian office being surprised that the US office has people with different political beliefs. And I think it was kind of like a little wake-up call for some people. They go, oh, shit, wait a minute. And I remember like HR had to get involved. People, I guess, did not realize this. And I think it was quickly kind of squashed, and nobody has really talked about it since. So this is years ago. So
Why did HR have to get involved?
Someone had made a joke about a political leader that someone from another office in another part of North America did not agree with. And I think the company-wide stance was, hey, like, we can't really be getting into this strife within the company. It was sort of like an early precursor to this Coinbase thing. There was obviously no official statement, but amongst the staff, it was kind of like, and I remember people were like, oh, yeah, I guess we can't really, not everyone thinks the same.
Surprise.
It was really weird. And like, this is coming from someone that doesn't really follow politics at all. But I remember being like, oh, well, I mean, I get why somebody's like, well, it doesn't really work for me.
And this has been a long time in the making. Like, this is not something that has just happened overnight. Like, the infrastructure for this has been laid literally over the last 20 years. Yeah, and of course, guys like Dick Costello and Jack Dorsey don't want it to stop because their platform is the epicenter of this type of mentality. I mean, there used to be the old joke about, hey, no religion, no politics at the dinner table. You didn't have to talk about it.
And if you dig down, pretty much everything, you could say everything's about politics. Like a silly little cartoon now is about politics, which is so frustrating, especially if you just want to connect with people overall, but you almost can't anymore.
You can't.
Or at least in limited ways.
I would agree with you. And it's also, too, as he pointed out in his blog post, you can't separate the personal from the beliefs anymore. Like, you can't sit down and have a conversation anymore. Because, I mean, there's been stories about, like, people be like, well, they don't want this person on their team. So you're putting together a team to work on a new patch for this piece of software, and the team doesn't want Billy on the team because Billy's a Republican. Like, this is insanity. It's absolute insanity, but it's something they've created. They've allowed it to grow. And now they're mad because it is what it is. So I just think they're going to start to peel it back because it's bad for business.